Good morning. Thanks very much for joining us. Really interesting topic today. We'll be looking at the life sciences side, health tech and precision medicine, looking at the key trends in the market, why it's such a big growth area, what that also means for the real estate and real asset side. Really interesting panel. And we'll also be looking at Glasgow as an example of that so that we can drill down a little bit in terms of some of the detail and what that means in terms of the investment side and also the requirement for occupiers in terms of space. So Carol, just a brief introduction of yourself, please.
I wear many hats within the University of Glasgow's College of Medical Veterinary Life Sciences. I'm Dean for Corporate Engagement and Innovation, and I'm also Chief Operating Officer. But for the last just over a year, I have also been directing the Living Lab for precision medicine. So my role is very externally facing, and I'm pretty passionate about what we're going to be able to achieve in Glasgow.
Great, thanks very much, Carol. Over to you, Marion. Just a brief introduction of yourself, please. That would be great, and also Precision Medicine Scotland.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Marion Mcneill. I'm the Chief Executive of Precision Medicine Scotland's Innovation Centre, and that Innovation Centre has been established now for about 7 years. And Carol was instrumental in helping set that Innovation Centre up, actually. We're based at the Clinical Innovation Zone at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and hosted by the University of Glasgow. But we're actually a consortium of all the medical health boards across Scotland and their associated academic partners. And we have some industry partners there on our consortium as well. And what we've been set up to do really was initially do some exemplar projects to prove out about what is possible in precision medicine in particular disease areas. And one of the things we want to highlight is our next stage now is looking at how to help translate that into the NHS, bring benefit to companies and industry who want to maybe move to Glasgow or establish themselves in Scotland, and to run more exemplar projects. And we're a key partner in the Living Lab, which again, like Carol, I'm really excited about because I think it's an opportunity to show this in real life patients and work with real, actual change happening that we'll be able to visibly see and measure. So I'm very excited about the future. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Marion. Let's come to you as well, Harper. Just a brief introduction of yourself and the company. That would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Harper VanSteenhouse. I'm a neuroscientist by training and have had a career in a number of different biotechnology startup companies, primarily in marketing and new technology commercialization, mostly focused around genetic technologies and bringing new things to market. So BioClavis is a company that's, as alluded to by Carol, has been set up here in Glasgow as a spin out of a sister company in California. We set up the business over here for sort of two reasons. One, we needed closer access to Europe. I was tired of waking up at 3 a.m. for phone calls. And then we also have, core business reasons. So we're a diagnostics company using the technology invented in California, but applying it for lower cost, higher throughput diagnostics, kind of pushing the limits of what can be done in a more practical sense, rather than necessarily pushing the limits of, the research grade clinical work that can be done. And so Glasgow's been a great place to do that. And you see in my picture here, we're located right there on the campus of one of the largest hospitals in the world, certainly the largest I've ever seen, with an amazing biorepository and good colleagues such as Carol and Marian and several others. And so we're doing all this diagnostics work as well as servicing our European customers from this site.
That's super. Thanks very much. And Emma, over to you. Just an introduction of yourself and the company would be great.
Thanks, Richard, and good morning, everybody. I'm Emma Goodford. I'm a proprietary partner at Knight Frank. We're a real estate advisory business. We're a global firm. We have about 16,000 people across 350 offices, including in Scotland, in Glasgow, Aberdeen, and Edinburgh. And all the major UK cities, of course. My particular responsibility is focused very much on the southeast and the Golden Triangle area. And on a day-to-day basis, I advise in the development, leasing, and occupier advisory area. In the US, we now have a partnership with Cresa, who have offices, of course, in San Diego, Boston, Cambridge, and San Francisco, the cornerstones of the life sciences sector. And I'm part of their life science practice group.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Emma, let's start with you maybe. Oh, and just for everybody watching, the joy of these things being live is that, of course, we can take your comments, take your questions. I can see there's already some comments in the comments side. So please put those in. It's just on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll make sure we pick those up and answer them. Emma, a lot of discussion there, both in the introduction actually from Minister McKee, but also from Carol, just about the growth in this area. I suppose, what from your point of view is really driving that growth?
It's been an unbelievable, I suppose, 24 months for the sector, but it's much, much deeper than that. The pandemic, and excuse the pun, has given it a huge shot in the arm. But frankly, it is deeper than that. I think when we look at it, we could reduce it down just to the data, and venture capital funding, which obviously is a proxy for company growth and the sector activity generally, hit record levels last year in 2021 at about £5.6 billion. That was about a 50% increase on 2020. So it just showed the volume, if you like, of cash flows actually going into the industry. A second marker would be, for example, incorporations in the sector. There were over 1,000 life science business registrations last year. 5 years ago, that was 450. So two metrics that just show incredible dynamism across the sector, even before you start getting into things like M&A activity and IPO activity, the amount of vacancies in the sector. Job vacancies were up 58% in 2021, showing the sort of voracious demand from companies in the sector for talent. And I think, particularly the importance of talent and the opportunities in the UK to provide those talent pools to companies.
And do you think it's really made a huge change, just in terms of the focus on COVID, or has that really been driving forward prior to the pandemic? So, where do you see that kind of pre and post pandemic?
Well, it's a good question. I am regularly asked, is the boom that we've sort of witnessed in the life sciences sector akin to the technology bubble that we saw at the very end of the 90s? And my response to that typically is that was a sector that pretty much came out of nowhere. And we have to remember that the life sciences sector was an incredibly established sector right across the UK prior to COVID. We've just had this incredible acceleration, and it's probably coincided with a lot of digital and technology transformation that has really enabled the sector.
Okay, great. It would be interesting just to get, I think, from you, Harper, just your sense, obviously, as a company operating in this area. What have you been seeing in terms of that growth? And I suppose where do you see this heading?
Yeah, we've seen a couple of doses of growth like this in my history, especially in California. We had in I guess the early 2000s or so, very similar trends here, fueled slightly differently, as we're saying, a whole lot of money going toward COVID based activities, which then spill over and enable a lot of companies to invest that revenue for sort of more long-term core aspects of their business. What we've seen then, following on those trends is what we would expect, frankly, which is getting harder to hire and retain employees massively in America. It's slightly easier over here. We've been able to hire pretty well in Glasgow, but it's getting more challenging. Add on top of that inflation concerns and those sorts of things, and that drives salary demands upward, of course. And then the common theme that I think we've heard from a lot of groups, we're generally doing okay on space, but we're growing very quickly, as are a lot of firms, and a lot of companies are having difficulty finding the amount of space they need. Certainly much more challenging than it was 5 years ago. And so those are, maybe not too surprising, but they're definitely hitting us as an industry right now.
Okay, good. It'd be interesting to get your perspective, Marion. We've obviously heard from Carol specifically there about what's happening in Glasgow, but from your perspective, looking at it across Scotland, and I suppose you've also then got, you know, some perspective as well on what's happening in other countries, but particularly across Scotland. What are you seeing as the sort of key trends here in this sector?
So I just backing what the others have said, really, in terms of the growth has been accelerated by COVID, but I think it was there anyway. I think we've learned to be really flexible and pivot and adapt. And technologies that would have come anyway have just been brought forward quicker. We've really opened our eyes. And I think the Lighthouse Lab in Glasgow is a really great example of how we can very quickly pull together and find a solution and then bring in the right skills and workforce. And one of the things that we do as an innovation centre is we support a master's programme specifically on precision medicine. And that's to bring in, again, more highly skilled workforce that are ready to take on the challenges for this area, because this area is not just genomics. It's actually all the different factors that feed into it. So it's imaging and data and IT platforms to analyse that data, and bioinformaticians and things like that. So we're a very well connected ecosystem. I mean, Scotland's population is just over 5 million. So somebody said to me it's the perfect study sample because we're very well connected. And then every patient has this CHI number that links all their data. So again, it makes it very easy to do rapid research in this area. And sadly, we've also got a high incidence of complex diseases, chronic diseases. So it makes us, again, quite a good place to build data sets and analyse that information. So yeah, I think it's a great place to come and see the flexibility and what we can produce.
And from your point of view, Harper, I mean, Marion there mentioned obviously the sample sizes, but also that idea of being able to collaborate. How important is that for you? Because it's interesting to get a sense of that, I think, particularly for companies and occupiers, in terms of what's driving your decisions about where to locate and the type of space that you need.
For us, it's critical. We have a neat technology, and that's our core expertise, but we don't pretend to be experts in all the clinical areas where we're trying to solve problems. And so we really depend on those collaborations with the clinicians that are located in buildings like these, as well as strewn about the university for early stage discoveries to make it through. And so we've been really happy with this situation in Glasgow, and it was something we sort of stumbled upon early on before moving, and it's really proven itself out. I come from San Diego, where arguably you've got one of the biggest clusters of a lot of biotech happening, but the level of collaboration, the level of interaction, the level of sort of mutually beneficial win-win situations. Glasgow is just excellent for that, and really holds its own despite being smaller in size, quite frankly. The other thing that's really impressive to me is just the quality of scientists coming out of the university, coming out of the other companies. It's always, the industry always gets a little sharing of resources, but here in Glasgow, it's I think a more sustainable and a more friendly environment. We're always going to lose employees to other companies and those sorts of things, but it doesn't feel cutthroat in that sense. And so all of these different aspects, altogether, I'd sum it up with basically people in Glasgow and Scotland, from my experience, are genuinely interested in the overall good, the greater success of the area, because we kind of recognize that's going to be beneficial to all of us.
And Carol, do you get the feel? I mean, obviously, we had the introduction there from Ivan McKee. In terms of, I suppose, driving livability, wellness, those kinds of things, which are very important in terms of, and I'll come to you in a second on this, Emma, but very important in terms of investors looking at investability of cities in general, but also about retaining talent and those kinds of things, so that Harper actually has the kind of employees that he's looking for to take it forward. How important, I suppose, is creating the right infrastructure? Obviously, we can use Glasgow as an example, but this will be the same case for all cities.
So I think the infrastructure is more than the bricks and mortar, and we're really fortunate now in Glasgow that we've had such a huge investment in the physical infrastructure. But it's also about that. It's about the softer infrastructure. It's about the culture that we've developed. That real genuine strength of partnership that's coming through. And one of the things that I think I've noticed over the last couple of years, particularly with the pandemic, is that it's really helped us cross across sectors and not to stay in our own bubble. I think that the pandemic has helped us reach out to engineers, to lots of different disciplines, and realise that actually we're all working towards a common goal. We've all got different things to contribute, but working together is just so important. And the other thing over the last couple of years that I think has been increasingly true is that young people now see medicine as much broader than just becoming a doctor. Young people now understand that it does take a multidisciplinary approach, and you can be a data scientist, or you can be an engineer, or you can you can be somebody who's a process engineer or expert, and so we're getting a lot of interest from different sectors coming together, which is really adding to the rich talent base that we have in Glasgow, and of course we not only have a lot of graduates coming out of the university, and as Marion says, we've got some really kind of specialist programs which are truly excellent and sector leading, but we've also got really good relationships with colleges and school sectors, and really thinking about how we bring more young people into this area. So I know I've gone off your question slightly, but to me it's not just about the hard infrastructure, it's about the wider ecosystem that we're creating.
No, that's really interesting, and I'll pick that up with you in a second. But just a reminder that there is now the presentation from Carol is in the files on the right-hand side of your screen, so you can download that. And thanks to Gavin and others for putting in different links as well there for those who are interested in that particular side of it. Emma, just coming to you, just picking up that point as well around, I suppose, talent, but also what cities are needing to do to be able to track that. But also I wanted to pick up with you just where, I suppose, life sciences sits, because you're looking at the office sector overall. So do you see this as a kind of tiny niche area of office? Is it something that's going to be growing into its own kind of subsector? Where do you see it at the moment, and how do you see that going forward, Emma?
Yeah, I'm going to start by stealing an expression that one of my clients uses, which when he talks about the sort of real estate aspect of providing bricks and mortar to the life science sector, he says they don't do real estate, they build communities. And I think that's a really important thing for developers and investors in the sector to really put at the forefront. So this triple helix of academia, of NHS, and of the sector, the operators in the sector, is an incredibly important factor for everybody to keep sort of front of mind. And I think at the moment we have a weight of money coming into the sector. They've seen massive growth. They've seen, Harper mentioned it, enormous inflation. Both in terms of the input costs as the investor buying either bricks and mortar or land for development. And a few of them have been tempted to stray perhaps away from those places which are going to be delivering the best result, whether it's performance or frankly the best result for the businesses that need to be based there. So I think I think what we will see is a continuation of specialist locations which have that triple helix opportunity rising, and those other locations which don't really provide that, frankly not able to create a niche for the life sciences sector. I think we are just at that point where inflation is going to be a great concern. I mean, there was a transaction that was committed last week in Oxford at £24 million an acre. Now that is probably, I could say, 10 times the sort of price that would have been paid ahead of the last 24 months and the huge expansion in interest in this sector. And that, of course, will then feed through to inflation on rents. and create potentially, I think, issues for the occupiers coming in to take accommodation in that sort of location, in that type of prime location.
So from your point of view, Emma, does that mean that there may be a slight focus away from some of the Golden Triangle aspects, if we're looking at the UK particularly here, that sort of Golden Triangle, and to more kind of the regional cities, but obviously understanding what you're mentioning there about the triple helix element?
Well, there's two things I think that play into that. I mean, firstly, and Carol mentioned it, there is the government's levelling up agenda, and their focus on putting, I think 40% of increased money into the R&D sector by 2030. And obviously that money coming in from government is going to be matched against private investment that's made in those locations. So there will inevitably be investment that will be made outside of the southeast. And I think secondly, there is the spatial arrangement of the workforce in the sector. There's about 280,000 people employed in the sector very broadly across the UK. 50% of those are employed outside of London and the southeast. So you have got balance, but I do think it where companies want to go will be those locations where that triple helix ecosystem exists, and I think it will become much more difficult for those who, if you like, are looking to ride the real estate wave of value creation. It will become much more difficult for those locations perhaps to really establish themselves without that access to a brilliant NHS hospital and without that access to academia.
That's interesting. And Marion, I wanted to pick up with you. You mentioned previously that focus on innovation. I suppose, how important is that as a component, particularly for this sector, that link in with innovation and innovation districts, perhaps as well?
Yes, thank you. I guess it comes down to something that Carol's mentioned, is about the support that we get from government, which helps support therefore the innovation, that people have these amazing ideas. Sometimes an idea is somebody's out for the weekend on their cycle or something and they have a brainwave, but how do they get it to market and how do they make it become a reality? And one of the things that, the team here in Glasgow, and I call us a team because we do feel like we work together even though we sit in different sectors. So I have this network, which sounds kind of cliched almost, like we used to network face-to-face at meetings. We've actually got an incredible network where I know I can pick up the phone to a decision maker in the NHS and ask their advice about technology that somebody's brought to me, that I'm thinking, where's the best place for them to next go to and how do we make that happen? So innovation is fostered here, and we don't just think about it for us. For instance, if somebody approaches us with an idea that's not specifically just for our innovation centre, we're well connected into all the innovation centres in Scotland now. The Scottish Government invested in those 7 years ago, and the UK Government have identified precision medicine as a high potential opportunity. And then you overlay that on top of that, the investment in levelling up and the innovation zone that they want to create for science in general in Scotland. And I think Scotland really is going to rise higher and higher in people's awareness, I hope, about actually what it feels like, because we don't just talk about it, it's real. We actually have those connections and those links that we can bring to life for people. Whereas I've been to other centres that will show you a very glossy, outside approach, and it looks very beautiful and you think, oh yes, I'd love to be based here. But the reality is they're not so well connected, sometimes because they've been too focused on their own, what they're trying to do. Whereas in Scotland, we take a much more holistic approach about what's the overall benefit to the economy, what's the benefit to the people that are coming here, and how do we help them stay? I mean, Harper, I would say, when I first met him, they came to sort of view Scotland with other places that they were looking at. And one of the things we wanted to make sure is he left feeling like he was a friend, that, there's that opportunity. And he's smiling now because he's probably going, no, not really, don't like you guys. But it's that whole kind of, we want to build those relationships because that's what will carry us forward. It's that looking out for each other.
Harper, you can come back on that if you want to.
Great. I mean, we're great friends. I mean, even when it's not directly related to business, brainstorming this sort of innovative idea generation stuff. I mean, it's a great environment around here. Marian, all of our colleagues, and it's, just to expand a little bit, there's, innovation is hard to force. But without an environment that fosters it, it also won't flourish and it won't grow. And so you have to have this sort of necessary but not sufficient environment. And that's what we found here in Glasgow. We've got the driving force. We'll push it forward, but we need an environment. We need the people. We need the sort of location to access markets. We need sample access, clinical expertise, those sorts of things. And with that, then we can take our little spark of brilliance, add it into everybody else's, and the whole becomes much greater than the parts.
Can I add in just another thing I was thinking about there just now when Marion and Harper were speaking, and something about our location is the accessibility and the affordability of it, and I think that also sets us apart from some of the kind of golden triangle, for example, locations. And an example of that has been the Lighthouse Lab and COVID Testing Centre. We've been running that 24/7. We've got 800 staff and we're running it 24/7. And all of these people can get to that location. It's all within pretty much easy commuting distance for them living. And I think one of the things that companies have been finding very attractive about locating in Glasgow is the fact that they've not only got access to the talent pool, but that talent pool can afford to live here, and that they can commute very, very easily to their to their place of work. And I think that also plays into the mix, the mixable location as well.
And that allows us, if you don't mind, it allows us as employers then to both attract and retain staff, but frankly, they're happier. People can afford to live. Scientists can afford to live even earlier in their careers in Glasgow, have a great lifestyle, have a great place to live. In San Diego, I won't lie, it's pretty hard to own a house and have a good lifestyle on a entry-level technician salary, those sorts of things. And it's really difficult. And so that's absolutely, it's one of these sort of smaller factors maybe when you're looking at the big picture, but it's really important for employees and employers.
And Carol, just coming to you, obviously, one of the challenges maybe is, Harper mentioned, there is space and the space to grow. In what you're doing there in Glasgow, how much opportunity is there for that kind of growth, I suppose? How do you plan for that whilst also still keeping that collaborative element?
So we set up our original clinical innovation zone a few years ago. That was the University of Glasgow that did that. Working with the NHS, who've been very forward-looking and allowed us to actually bring industry right into the heart of the campus, which is pretty unusual. Not sitting in the outskirts, but actually right in the middle of the campus. But we did that not because the university wanted to be a landlord, far from it. We did that because we wanted to have the benefits of the relationships and the partnerships. And that is really, as we've heard, really shown itself to be successful. So what we're now doing through the investment in the Living Laboratory is that we're now working to really expand that campus and to create more physical space. And we're really fortunate that the location of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital has got a lot of land around it. And so we're working with Cadence, that hopefully are going to be joining us in a bit, to design and build more purpose-built space. And that, again, we're working to make sure that space is not just a building. I mean, it's going to be a super amazing building, but what we want to do within the building is be able to facilitate the relationships working. So make sure that we've got the access to the clinicians, we've got the access to researchers. So it will have an ethos that will help us continue to grow and develop that ecosystem approach that we're building. And Cadence, as say, who are our partners in that, are very much of that mindset. So it's been a real meeting of minds when we started working with Cadence. So we're, as I say, very, very ambitious around what we would like to do in the future. The building that we've already got underway is going to be hopefully the first of many, because as part of so mentioned briefly at the beginning in the earlier presentations, we are part of the Glasgow Riverside Innovation District. So we're sitting on the Clyde. The city is building a new bridge across the Clyde, a walkway, which is going to be connecting us with the West End of Glasgow, which is the location for one of the universities, or the main university campus there. So that's going to be a very, very quick way for us to be connecting researchers with the hospital. I mean, it's at the moment, if you're driving or cycling, it's literally kind of like 10 to 15 minutes away. But the creation of a new bridge is going to bring that even closer. So working with the city and on building the innovation district is really going to enhance access to the site, and also to the buildings themselves.
And Harper, and that's interesting about that hard infrastructure as well that's being built there, Carol. Harper, just from your point of view, maybe looking at what you're doing, but also at other companies in the sector, because it's a new area for a lot of people in terms of this life sciences side. How data intensive is it? Is it a mixture of sort of traditional, what people might view as traditional laboratory, or is it more data center, or, I suppose, what's the makeup of it?
Yeah, it's kind of all the above. And it goes along this theme, just to kind of, maybe not to put words in Carol's mouth, but she sort of alluded to this. The university is sort of optimizing for innovation and growth rather than optimizing for landlord ownership, property development, that sort of thing. And, that what that means is, it becomes a really good landing spot for us. We started with 4 people that I hired here in Glasgow and myself, and we've grown to 30. And the university has been flexible with us all the way through, and making sure they can support that as we grow. Our needs grow in terms of space, in terms of infrastructure, what we need. The things like access to data centers. It started out, we had 1 server, and now we have 2 racks of servers. Being able to grow like that, and start small, but to be able to support us in that way has been a real advantage that we've had. There's other things that, just by being on the NHS campus, we have security, we have amazing transit links, we have sort of, rubbish and other utility stuff that we just don't have to think about, which we'd rather think about science, frankly, especially in early days when that's all we should be thinking about. And then the other thing that it really added was a layer of credibility to us as a new company. I was able to have big name companies as potential customers or early customers come and visit us, and it adds a layer of impressiveness and stability that a brand new company wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. So we also benefited from that. And that's something I think the whole industry benefits from by showing this sort of stability and ability to grow. Companies generally don't want their vendors to disappear on them overnight. And so showing a strong community where we all support each other is also good for business.
Good. Emma, I just wanted to come to you on picking up how you think investors see that element, because Harper mentioned that there's elements of data center, there's elements of traditional lab within that. Does that make it more complicated for investors, you think, to see the opportunity, or is that just a question of, I suppose, the educational piece, people learning more about it from people like Knight Frank? What's the where?
I think what investors have realized in this sector is that the role of place is incredibly important. And I think, both Harper and Carol mentioned this ability to create a place where you can accommodate startup businesses right through to established players is the ideal ecosystem, if you like. If you've got a large enough holding to be able to do that, and an investment strategy that allows you to create that, that would be ideal for this particular sector, pretty much in any location. So I think, yes, there are certain specialist aspects. The pull on power, and data storage, etc., is absolutely understood, and that doesn't exist across the piece. You've got to understand, what your utilities provision is, etc. But I think, as I say, role of place is really important. And I think we are beginning to see a shift. The sector initially, I suppose, established itself predominantly on edge of town, campus environments. And I think we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years an acceptance that the urbanization of the centre is now becoming more important. And that's partly to do with transport and access. It's partly to do with, I suppose, the walkability that we saw because of COVID, everybody wanting, if they could, to be able to walk or cycle to their place of work. And I think that will increase. And that will put, different pressures, I suppose, on particularly developers and investors in terms of how they develop in more urban districts to provide for the sector. The logistics around the sector is the operators in the sector, can be quite complicated, which is part of the reason why campus developments work best. But I think an expert and a proper knowledge of the sector and what the occupiers need, what the universities interacting with them require, how the NHS hospital environment again interacts with that is you have to bring all these components together as you begin to develop a life sciences cluster.
And Carol, do you see that? I mean, that's interesting that, so in a way, you've either got to make the clusters more, where they are, a larger part of the, of an area of, add livability and those kinds of elements to it, or you've got to begin moving them closer into the city centre. How do you deal with that, Carol?
So, I think we've got the best of both worlds. I mean, we obviously have naturally built around the hospital campus the Scottish Government investment in that hospital, which I think was 2015 when it opened. That provided a real opportunity for us to turn, what was Europe's largest hospital into the go-to place for innovation, particularly in the precision medicine space. And so that became our centre of gravity. That became where we put our focus, because we really saw the opportunity. But the location of that hospital is just superb. I mean, we're less than 10 minutes from Glasgow International Airport. We're less than 10 minutes from the university's main campus, which in itself is going through a huge expansion. And we're another 10 minutes from Glasgow city centre. So we've got it's just a great location. But because it's in Govan, which is not the leafy suburbs, it's an area that is ripe for development, which means that there is land that we've been able to use to expand. So from that point of view, it's given us both the opportunity for the future, but also been able to harness the strengths that we've got of that location.
And that's and Emma, just from your point of view, are you seeing? I mean, we've been following quite a big focus on purpose-driven investment, impact investment in general from the large capital sources beginning to look at these particular areas. Do you think there'll be an increased focus on this as part of the office sector, maybe because it does have a kind of social impact side to it as well, given that it's in the healthcare sector?
I think investors are becoming incredibly aware of that side, that being sort of one of their criteria in terms of how they invest. But they have all sorts of things that they consider, obviously return on investment being key, and they can principally see that in the sector because of the growth potential. The other area I think that's becoming incredibly important that we haven't really touched on is the sort of environmental aspects. The S and the G absolutely understood because of the community benefits, etc., and the health opportunities. But the environmental issues, I think, are something that investors are slightly challenged by the sector, because we have to acknowledge there's a huge amount of electricity consumption, there's a huge amount of water consumption in many of these areas. It's not the most sustainable sector operationally. And how that works into real assets will be, I think, a factor that may at some point just make people just consider the future suitability and growth potential. But overall, the ESG is relatively balanced, and certainly the community benefit, I think, is absolutely recognised and understood.
Great, thanks. We've got around 3.5 minutes left. So I just wanted to pick up a view from everybody. I suppose on where you see the opportunities going forward. We can look at 2022, or we can open our horizons larger than that. But I suppose where are the key opportunities at the moment? Let's start with you, Marion.
One of the big opportunities, I think, is to approach us with any ideas. We're very open to wanting to discuss, what's your innovation and what do you want to help with. And to me, one of the biggest opportunities is the investment in the Living Lab, that you can become a partner in those projects. So we're building these real world setting projects in pharmacogenomics and transcriptomics with Harper's company, where we want other companies then to come in and collaborate on that resource we're building. So data is a huge part of something that we've really got to grips with, and that Scotland is really pulling together really effectively, that will give companies the opportunity to come in and use that data to prove out their innovation, to work with the development. So to me, I think that's an area that we're leading on at the moment, and I know that's a big claim, but I'm making that claim with sort of backup of companies that are now coming to us and are quite excited about the opportunity to collaborate. So hope that helps.
Great, thanks. Carol.
So for me, immediate opportunities will be to collaborate. Very, very open to new projects, to new collaborators to come and work with us in the Living Lab. In the kind of medium term, over the next 4 to 5 years, we will have our new building open, and we're looking to create a lot of jobs in Glasgow, really grow the ecosystem from what is already successful, but really taking it to the next level, and got ambitions really to grow over 500 jobs over the next kind of 4 or so years. And then looking ahead, even kind of 10 years in the future, what we really want to do is to see the Glasgow Riverside Innovation District really flourishing, and we would like to see that the whole development of the Clyde actually becomes a really huge, attractive place for the life sciences cluster to develop even further.
Great, thanks. Emma, over to you.
I think there's going to be 3 key elements that the sector is going to be challenged by in the next few years. One is effectively the race for space. And I think that will probably result in quite a lot of repurposing of buildings that may provide particularly short-term solutions for quite a lot of companies. I think it's going to be challenged by cost, inflation, because the input costs are going up. And I think there will at some point be a ceiling possibly on how the occupier market responds to that. And something we haven't touched on, which is sort of new wave manufacturing. I'm always told that the UK and Europe don't manufacture a single aspirin. And I think in COVID, we've seen the fragility of the supply chain. And I think around some of these life science clusters, we will see an emerging manufacturing sector have to develop, and how that works with the key sort of innovation and key life science regions, how that sort of fits in the patchwork will be really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Emma, actually, and we'll also be covering a topic around advanced manufacturing coming up, actually, because I think that's going to be a really interesting topic in general, particularly for the UK markets there as well. And Harper, last word to you.
I think that everything people have said is true, and then, from my standpoint, in terms of where we're going as an industry and businesses, is using all that collaboration, all that infrastructure, all these innovations to add to productivity and efficiency. We've got a big backlog of patients that need care, and there are not enough people to do it. And so figuring out ways that we can contribute to that as an industry and solve some of this manpower shortfalls is a key area of growth and interest.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Thank you, Harper, Carol, Marion, and Emma. Really interesting discussion. Thanks to Ivan McKee also for joining us earlier for the welcome. Really interesting to get his perspective on that. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much, everybody.